of you that are following our conversation. We are today debating Putin's war on Europe, where lies South Asia. I think that since 1938 and 39, when Europe faced an aggression from a totalitarian power, Europe had not been clearly confronted with such an act that is absolutely out of the international law, that is disregarding all principles, human life, disregarding everything that is dear for our European Union. I think it is a war on Europe. Our leaders were a bit slow to realize it, but I think that most, not all, but most have been realizing what is at stake. And South Asia Democratic Forum, I think that we have a contribution to do in this circumstance, which is exactly to highlight where does lie South Asia, because South Asia is the biggest region in the world. It's absolutely crucial for everything that is going on, and sometimes it has been not taken sufficiently in a sufficiently serious way by other players in the world. And so to do so, we are having Dr. Siegfried Wolf, who is our Director of Research and is well known for all of you that know SADF. I am moderating, but we have a very special guest today. We have Dr. Susa Anna Ferenczi. She is speaking to us from Taipei in Taiwan. She has an impressive curricula. She speaks, loads of languages, European ones like Hungarian, Romanian, English, and French. She studied in the United States. She studied in France. She is linked to the Brussels Free University. She worked for the European Parliament as well. Namely, what I think is her main book, she wrote Europe, China, and the Limits of Normative Power. She is a specialist in the Indo-Pacific, which is the major playground, was perceived like that already for roughly 10 years by the United States, and I think it is true, in the world. And she will give us her views on what is happening there, and especially she will concentrate on India. Dr. Siegfried Wolf, he will concentrate on Pakistan. And just let me tell you that, well, South Asia, defined by SARC, South Asia Association for Regional Cooperation, comprises 8 states. India and Pakistan are by far the most important, but regarding the others, Bhutan, Nepal, the Maldives are countries that condemned the unequivocally Russian aggression in the United Nations. And these 3 countries are sometimes seen just as not having a quite independent foreign policy. And they do, and they just showed that they have by doing what they did. Afghanistan, that is represented still by the legitimate authorities that no longer control Kabul as well. They obviously condemn the aggression, and by the way, Russia recognized, I think it is one of the first countries recognizing the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan, which is quite logic from their perspective. We have the Sri Lanka that is really engulfed in a very big crisis and depends a lot on China financial muscle and abstained in the United Nations. We have Bangladesh, that is a crucial country. That's perhaps the country where we have worked the most as ADF. Unfortunately, sometimes the West, especially the United States, has been very much lobbied by the Islamist fanatics to go against the secular Bangladesh authorities, and that's really a big mistake. Of course, Bangladesh is, like any other countries, have problems, but it's fundamentally a country that the international community, the European Union, should very much engage with. And it did change its mind on Russia. It condemned clearly Russia on the second motion passed by the United Nations. And then we have India and Pakistan that abstained, although there was a strong declaration from the Indian authorities condemning the massacres in Busha when they were highlighted. And I think this is a very important declaration. But anyway, I will now, after this small presentation of what we are discussing, I will leave now the floor to Dr. Susana Ferenczi to present us her point of view. Please, Dr. Ferenczi, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kasaka. It's really an honor to be participating in today's discussion. I am joining you from Taipei, as you mentioned. Thank you very much for the kind words to introduce me. Very generous of you. So in the next 10-12 minutes that I have, I would like to do a few things. So first, I would like to give some context to my focus today on India in the context of Russia's war against Ukraine, and then transition to the Indo-Pacific to elaborate more on India's role, and finally connect the dots and look at also EU-India, EU-China, Russia-China. There's a lot of dynamics there that we need to consider in order to have an accurate, as accurate as possible, of an assessment of what is happening there. So first on the context. Well, I would say that Putin's war against Ukraine and Beijing's political support for Moscow are pushing the EU to reevaluate its relations with Russia, but also with China, as well as to reevaluate its own self-perception as a geopolitical power in the Indo-Pacific. So since the war started, we see that while Ukraine has been under attack, Ukraine has been strengthening its democracy, while on the other hand, Russia has become more and more isolated, and NATO is more united than ever. And we see this unprecedented level of unity between the member states in the EU. Now, China finds itself in a difficult position strategically, of course, and by supporting Putin, Xi Jinping is damaging China's reputation and also worsening the already serious tension at the core of EU-China relations. So this is something that I can come back to later on, maybe in the discussion. And then finally, of course, India is balancing within a tense security environment in its own neighborhood, and the China factor remains a major concern for Delhi. So I will get to this point in the third part of my remarks. So in this context, I think that the EU is seeking increasingly to redefine its global role. So Putin's war in Ukraine is another wake-up call to get serious about the kind of role we want to play in the world, and also the interests that we have in the world, and also responsibilities. And this is reflected for the past few years through several communications that the EU has issued. This is not a new process. It goes back to the 2016 global strategy, but also most recently we issued the EU issued the Indo-Pacific strategy, the global gateway, as well as most recently the strategic compass, focusing more on hard security. So the EU's ties in this regard, the EU's ties with China on one hand and the EU's focus on the Indo-Pacific, I think, are the two central pillars in this process. And this is also because the Indo-Pacific has become a region that is the key driving force of trade-led growth, as well as a region where China's economic coercion has been the most acute. We see, as I said, I sit here in Taiwan, and we have seen Taiwan, Japan, Australia, Korea all being victims of China's economic coercion. And so inside the EU, among member states, there has been a lack of strategic vision on how to go forward, and also the Indo-Pacific as such was not really embraced on a European level for many years until recently. And there's been an anxiety about Beijing's growing influence in the region, but also inside Europe. And that has, in a way, pushed the EU to neglect much of the rest of Asia for many years. So I'm going back a bit just to highlight that, of course, the context is much bigger than what we're looking at right now. So the aim right now, however, also with COVID showing how vulnerable the EU has become, for the EU member states, the aim is to diversify our relations within the Indo-Pacific and to rebalance ties with China. And this elevates India's importance to the EU. I think this is one of the most important points I would like to make here, that this context, the global dynamics, and the awareness is making India more important for the EU and making the awareness more tangible inside the EU. So moving on now to assessing how the war is shaping dynamics in the Indo-Pacific. So I'm transitioning concretely to the Indo-Pacific now. So as I mentioned, we have in the European Union adopted an Indo-Pacific strategy in 2021. Of course, the idea of an Indo-Pacific region as a political concept is not a new concept, but it is a response to the changing balance of power in Asia, and it reflects how countries in the region are coping with China's growing assertiveness. And it also signals a shift of the strategic and economic center of gravity to the Indian and Pacific Oceans. So of course, there are different interpretations of the concept across the region. India, Japan, Australia, ASEAN countries, the US and the EU included, have all formulated their own visions. Some are closer to each other than others. For the US, the Indo-Pacific strategy is more about maintaining its predominance in the region. And for others, it's more a tool to create a multipolar Asia whose future is not determined only by the US and China. So both the EU and India have more of an inclusive approach towards the region. Concerning Europe, it may seem that the Indo-Pacific is far and is a remote area for Europe, but it is it is a region where if there is a conflict of some sort, there will be consequences on European prosperity and security. This is something that the EU's Indo-Pacific strategy makes clear, that Europe has an interest to maintain a rules-based order in the region, and Europe relies on partnerships. This is, again, at the core of the Indo-Pacific strategy, but also of the compass, the strategic compass that we recently published. So, of course, India is an important partner for the EU. And because, I sit in Taiwan, I'd like to mention that so is Taiwan. And perceptions have been changing. And this is something that both EU-India relations have benefited from, but also EU-Taiwan relations. The strategy for the Indo-Pacific makes it clear that if there's a conflict situation, as I said, or the display of force in the region may have a direct impact on European security and prosperity. So in this context, as I said, perceptions are changing, and European perceptions of what EU-India relations should be about is also changing. So finally, transitioning more concretely in this context to India, well, India has been seeking to balance its position concerning the war in Ukraine, but it's been more of a long-term balancing for India, maintaining long-standing friendship with Russia, but also growing closer to the EU and also to the United States. There is a geopolitical reality, however, that we need to consider, and the fact that India sits in a very tense security environment, and India is dependent on Russia in terms of defense. So I would say on one hand that India is essentially seeking to look out for its own strategic interests in its own region. And this is something that European Union member states and the EU as a whole needs to consider and understand in some way or another. That I'm highlighting here that this is the reality. Of course, how we live with this reality and how India can use its relations with Russia for as leverage over the situation is the next question to ask. And I think that's where I see more room for maneuver. But the reality as such on the ground is that there is a security environment in which India is where China is of great concern and is central to how India sees its role in the region going forward. So I think it is important for Europe to understand that, given also India's relevance to our role in the Indo-Pacific and India's importance to how we want to go forward. Of course, India's ambivalent posture right now concerning the war can be understood in this context, but I think Europe it also expects India, given our growing relationship, to be more supportive towards the European Union as it faces such a difficult and a tough period with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So I think both Europe needs to consider India's context, but India also needs to understand that it also is important to protect its interests with the EU. Speaking of China, of course, the EU would have liked to see China take a more clear stance as well and not show that political support to Moscow. But of course, the expectations are very different from China compared to what we expect from India and what we can give China and what we can give India in that sense. It was and it has been the China factor that has pushed India closer to the United States and also the EU. We have the Quad security dialogue between the US, Australia, and Japan. And so I see that to some extent India sees value in an empowered Russia, in the sense of preventing Chinese hegemony in the region. Putin has described India as a friendly nation, a friend, essentially. But then Putin is also growing closer to Xi Jinping. So India, on one hand, fears China's growing regional influence. And in this regard, Russia is more of a partner, can be more of a partner for India. But India also fears closer ties between Russia and China. On the other hand, Russia is suspicious of India being in the Quad security dialogue, as well as India getting closer to the European Union. So I think there's a lot of dynamics and there's a serious amount of balancing happening on every front. And I think we can only understand that if we look at it in the right context. So India, of course, also wants to play a leadership role in its own region. I think this is something that is a widespread view across the Indian political spectrum. But of course, the regional leadership role for India is not uncontested. There's Russia in the region, in South Asia, and there is China, of course, and they have different ways of entry and different tools to establish their own influence and project power. Now, after in whichever way things will evolve in the near future concerning the war in Ukraine and Russia's position and capacities, we will see to what extent Russia can project power and where it can do so. And what this means for EU, India, of course, it is of a high relevance. But just to conclude here, because I think I'm coming to the end of my remarks, I think the China factor will remain central going forward in considerations out of Delhi, out of Moscow, out of Brussels, out of Taiwan as well. There are many areas of cooperation where India and the EU need to strengthen cooperation beyond the situation that we need to deal with right now, which is to find an end and put an end to the aggression. So I think I will stop here so I don't take up too much time, and I'm happy to elaborate more on specific questions concerning EU, India, Taiwan, and specific areas of potential to cooperate. So thank you for your attention.
Dr. Ferenczky, thank you so much for your very highlighting remarks. I think that I feel like asking you a lot of questions to continue what you just said, because a lot of the issue, I think that you touched on all the most important points. They need to be developed. But before I do so, let's introduce another ingredient in our conversation that is a different one, of course, that touches a lot India, and that has been on the limelight as well, Pakistan. We are now going to give the floor to Dr. Wolf to introduce us how the situation, this Russia aggression, is also impacting the situation in Pakistan, and then we will proceed to a conversation that will try to make the whole of it comprehensive and a structured view of the region regarding now the war front of Russia with Europe. Please, Dr. Wolf.
Thank you very much, Paulo, for your introduction. As you already indicated, I will have a slightly different angle. I will focus more, I will start from a more domestic kind of view. To assess how far there is an Ukrainian factor in Pakistani politics, it is essential to recall the latest developments in the country. During the last weeks, Pakistan witnessed one of its most severe political turmoil, leading to a change in government. After the then Prime Minister Imran Khan, who used every available means, mostly unconstitutional and illegal, to stay in power, lost a no-confidence vote, and opposition leader Shahbaz Sharif was elected as new prime minister. Well, short-lived and unstable governments, the armies and secret service dominant role in the country's decision-making, and a growing leverage by Islamist forces within the institutional administrative structures are most noteworthy characteristic of Pakistan's political arena. In fact, the ousting of successive ruling administrations is as old as Pakistan itself. According to observers, almost all political and religious parties were somehow involved in the toppling of governments in the past. Khan too faced frequent pressures from the opposition, Islamic clerics, and other domestic social political actors since he became prime minister in 2018. Until April 10th this year, Khan has so far survived all attempts to remove him from office. Analysts agree that Khan's political resilience solely derived from the fact that he was supported by the military top brass. It is also generally assumed that Khan enjoys much goodwill by many of Pakistan religious, conservative, and ultra-right. Considering the numerous failures since 2018 to change the government in Islamabad, one must wonder what made the opposition this time successful. There are no doubts that recessions and other maldevelopments like the general mismanagement of government affairs, unfulfilled promises of reforms, Islamic radicalization and polarization, corruption, security-related instability, increasing dependence on China, complaints on Khan's personalized and autocratic style of governments, among others, were severe worsening. However, regarding the expert, the major reason for the toppling of the former government was that Khan lost the support from the army leadership, especially the backing of the Chief of Army Staff, General Bajwa. It is argued in this context that a major civil-military divide emerged during the last year, roughly, which sharpened due to disagreements over the appointment of the new Director General of the Inter-Service Intelligence, in brief, the ISI. Also, Khan's decision to delay the granting of Chief of Army Staff Bajwa's term extension further strained his relationship with the military. Khan's allergy of Osama bin Laden's or the description of the takeover of Kabul by the religious fanatic Taliban as breaking the shackles of slavery created additional setbacks, not only in Washington ties with Islamabad, but also between Khan and the military top echelon. Khan's increasingly stringent criticism of the European Union and his pro-Islamist policies, which were leading to a severe deterioration of human rights and living conditions among minorities in Pakistan, not only raised eyebrows in Brussels, but also created serious concerns among Pakistan's establishment. And here, not only the civilian, but also the military, of course. Khan's stand on Russia's war against Ukraine led to a further escalation in the civil-military relations. And here, important to mention is on February 23, Imran Khan arrived in Moscow for a 2-day visit. According to open sources, the Prime Minister's Russia trip was for an exchange of views on major regional international issues, aiming at a reset of bilateral ties and expanding cooperation in the energy sector. But when opening the discussion with Mr. Putin, Imran Khan chose a remarkable peculiar statement. Referring to the current situation, Khan said, "What a time I have come, so much excitement." Even before Khan's departure to Moscow, it was already well known that Russia is taking unprovoked coercive measures against Ukraine. Making the situation worse, just a few hours after Khan's dubious remark, Russia conducted his full-scale invasion of the Ukraine. As such, it does not come by surprise that Khan's appearance in Moscow raised much criticisms, not only internationally, but also in Pakistan. Commentators described the first visit by a Pakistani prime minister to Russia after 23 years as ill-timed. Moreover, Khan's refusal to condemn Russia's aggression against Ukraine was interpreted among Pakistani security circles as a step towards further isolation. Instead of supporting the international community to increase economic sanctions to convince Putin to stop the war, Khan signed import deals with Moscow worth of billions of dollars. That Khan's approach towards the Russia-Ukraine war did not find the blessing of the army top brass is best expressed in the statement by General Bajwa taking a contrary stand. Speaking at the recent Islamabad security dialogue, General Bajwa called for an immediate stop of the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, terming it a great tragedy. Moreover, he expressed Pakistan's serious concern over the conflict, adding that Russia's aggression against a smaller country cannot be condoned. As such, Bajwa clearly distanced itself from Khan. There are several other reasons why Khan's ignorance of the obvious plight of the Ukrainian people and the apparent Russian war crimes were not well taken by much of Pakistani elites. The fact that the Ukraine was an increasingly important supplier of military equipment as well as wheat, are some of them. But the final trigger for the end for the often called Khan-Bajwa regime, a term which was used to describe the initial cordiality between the Chief of Army Staff and the then Prime Minister, was Khan's promotion of the narrative of a foreign conspiracy against him because he was not willing to follow the US point of view regarding the Ukraine, and that he wanted to have closer relations with China and in particular with Russia. This created an additional severe burden for the US-Pakistan relation, which are already at a historical low point. But there's something else which is even more important than the fact that Khan stopped telling that Bajwa and other high-ranking officers wanted to hear from him. Khan intensified his instrumentalization of what he called Pakistan's independent foreign policy for his own political goals. More concretely, to push the polarization of the institutions and the society along anti-American, anti-West, anti-Europe lines, either for his own immediate political survival or to improve his future chances for a potential return into the prime minister office. But with this, he obviously passed clearly a red line and forced General Bajwa and military spokesman Major General Babar Iftikhar to make further statements that Khan's anti-West, pro-Russia policy do not reflect the stand of the army and is not in the international interest of the country. Literally, it was stated that Pakistan does not believe in camp politics, and our bilateral relation, Pakistan bilateral relation with their partners are not at the expense of our relationships with other countries. Or in other words, the army wants to have a clear, balanced relationship with Washington and Beijing. And having said this, Khan's rapprochement towards Russia does not fit into this picture. Moreover, according to observers, it seems that there is still substantial mistrust vis-à-vis Moscow, despite the improvement of the Pakistan-Russian ties during the last years. Subsequently, Pakistan military also dismissed allegation by Austin Khan that the United States had conspired with his political opponents to force him out from office. In sum, one can state that there is a Ukraine factor in Pakistani politics without doubt, but Khan's Russia visit and his refusal to condemn Putin's war on Europe was not the causal factor leading to his removal from office, but it functioned as a catalyst for it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Siegfried. I think it was very highlighting. We have a lot here to talk about, and I would perhaps start by India. I mean, India, it is often said, it is the biggest democracy in the world. It has been a functional democracy for quite a long time. It is the obvious potential ally of all of those who respect core values in international politics. And the feeling I have, I always did, even in the times I was in the European Parliament, I was there in the delegation for relations with India. And by the way, I was a friend of Taiwan, and that's how I visited Taiwan. Was in this context. I was approaching very much Taiwan, and Taiwan was for me something that was a very, very positive surprise to me. And I absolutely loved it in terms of how a Chinese society became completely democratic. It is really very telling. But getting back to India, the big issue is how comes that really Europe is so dismissive of the importance of India and is very happy to go on whatever happens to make relations difficult with India. That's really a very puzzling issue that is not only European. I mean, my view of the way that the current administration, Biden administration, it started its relations in the Indo-Pacific was absolutely disastrous, since one would expect a reinforcement of the Quad. The Quad is the main alliance. I mean, China said several times it's the Asian NATO, and attacked it ferociously. And of course, the Quad was, in my mind, the obvious place to put all the energies, to give all the strengths. France, for instance, was having a lot of common exercises with a Quad. And then suddenly, instead of this, we see a big row with, a commercial strategic row with submarines, having Australia in the future having nuclear submarines, which is not without problems regarding the nuclear international rules, causing a big mayhem, actually putting United Kingdom and France, their rivalry that we know very well of, putting it exploding in South Asia, in the Indo-Pacific as a whole. So I saw it really as a disastrous situation. Well, we are seeing that now the United Kingdom Prime Minister is in India. I mean, I think that Mr. Boris Johnson understood that India is really the place to be and the ally to keep, and to forget about the whole United Kingdom policy in South Asia that has been very, very debatable, to say the least. The European Union, will have to certainly to do something and to think of something. Obviously, what you said should be obvious to everyone. I mean, for a very long time, up to our day, I mean, Russia has been allied with India, supplied most of the defense instruments that India enjoys. It even, it supported, for instance, India against the Chinese Pakistani ambitions on Kashmir, and of course that India has a long relation with Russia. That does not mean that India can sustain what is happening now in Europe, and I don't think it does. But Europe has to understand the importance of India and has to act accordingly for its own goals, and of course for the situation in the Indo-Pacific, because it is the most important one at the world level, as you really indicated. So the issue is, other than this, the compass, the Indo-Pacific strategy, I mean, how do you see, Dr. Ferenczi, that Europe could really make really India the big ally in the region, as it should, if it really wants to face the challenges it is facing? This is really my first question to you, and I would perhaps take the opportunity to ask to Siegfried, when you will come to back to the screen. You said very clearly that the war of Russia on Ukraine was the catalyzer, and that's quite true. I mean, the whole of the process for making getting a new government started before the 24th of February. And actually, General Bajwa speech that you actually showed to me, that was a very interesting speech. He distances himself from Imran Khan on the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but not only. he says that that's a very, very interesting, that he's very concerned by the possibility, the war between China and India. He's very concerned. He's not supporting China. He's very concerned. And he's also very concerned with Afghanistan, where he openly criticizes the Taliban, says that they really are not up to the job. And this is completely in contradiction to Imran Khan's position. So is there, in your opinion, a hint that things might come differently? Because, in SADF, we always thought that for a dialogue to exist, the very first step would be to stop cross-border terrorism. And General Bajwa seems to indicate he is willing to give this step. So what do you think could happen in South Asia and, in the Indo-Pacific and the world at large, if he manages to make his policy the Pakistani policy? Well, but first, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Ferenczi. Please.
Thank you so much. Well, I think you pretty much commented in a very comprehensive way on the question itself, on the importance of India to the EU's global role in the Indo-Pacific, and how for a long time, as I also mentioned, India was not central. I mean, I think our approach to Asia was really much dominated by our interests and our relationship with China. And I think that has led to this huge imbalance in the relations. And this is why we are now seeing the need to rebalance our relations. And I think there is a new reality now. Clearly, this is not just a new reality because Russia attacked Ukraine inside Europe, but I think the new reality became more real and tangible already with COVID, because COVID has really exposed a lot of our vulnerabilities and our dependencies inside Europe. And that has brought the debate a new dimension. So I think the fact that, for example, right now, the president of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, is going to visit Delhi and participate as the chief guest in Delhi at the Resina Dialogue on April 24-25 to discuss several issues. And I'm just looking here at the press release that the EAS issued, what they're planning to discuss: climate change, biodiversity, energy, digital transition, connectivity, security and defense issues, and of course, cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. So I think the fact that she's going to visit as a chief guest and there's more and more reaching out from the EU is an indication that there's a new understanding in the EU that we need to work more closely with India. And I think that the key word here, not just for Europe, but for India as well, is resilience, to strengthen resilience and reduce vulnerabilities. Again, as I said, this was shown most painfully through COVID. And then the new situation unfolding with Russia's war against Ukraine. So I think it's almost, it has become of an urgency that cannot be downplayed. And there is enough pressure inside Europe to really be serious about the tools that we have to protect our interests. So on one hand, what I see the European Union institutions do more seriously is to work on that toolbox that we need to be able to defend our interests. So that is the toolbox to fight off against disinformation, but most importantly against economic coercion, to have tools that deter authoritarian governments, and I mean China here, of course, and also Russia, to undermine our interest and our unity. And at the same time, this is essential, right, to have the tools to be able to defend ourselves. Because I think having an anti-coercion instrument is in itself can serve as a deterrent. So what I see going forward is, again, I go back to the resilience and I go back to supply chains, because that is at the core of the Indo-Pacific strategy, and partnerships is at the core of the Indo-Pacific strategy. So working groups, obviously maritime security is important, but digital transition is important. Everything is important. If I can't really make a list of priorities, but I do see, and perhaps maybe here I'm a bit more optimistic, that what COVID has resulted in terms of awareness in the EU, and then came Putin's war against Ukraine. I think today, in light of what just happened in the past 2 years, this new reality is not one that can allow member states to go back to business as usual when it comes to China. The summit in April with China showed that the EU passed on a very clear message that there will be consequences. I mean, we didn't say what consequences there would be, but I think the tone is clear that we are dealing with a much more determined European Union. Of course, I don't want to be over optimistic either, because we know that anything depends on the support of all EU member states. At the end of the day, we are dealing with a fragmented European Union. And even though there is an unprecedented level of unity that we see inside the EU, we know that there are issues when it comes to the import of gas or oil from Russia. This is an issue that will perhaps shed light on the real sustainability of that unity that we really achieved in the past few weeks. But I am, in a sense, I would say, to conclude, more optimistic in going forward in the EU's understanding that we need to be serious in the Indo-Pacific, because we have interests to protect there. I mean, 1/3 of our trade goes through these lanes of trade corridor in the Indo-Pacific. And again, maybe this is the last thought on Taiwan. I think there's also a clear understanding that we are the biggest investor in Taiwan as the European Union, and that means that we clearly have interests to protect here. And working together with India, beyond the fact that we consider each other maybe like-minded partners in terms of democratic countries in the face of an authoritarian advance, I think it's become unavoidable that we take a different approach. And that different approach vis-a-vis China is clear. And I think India is part of that conversation much more than it was before.
Thank you very much. This was an excellent summing up. Optimism, I think there are grounds to be optimistic. I fully agree with you. This anti-coercion instrument is a very interesting perspective. It is, last but not least, you said it, it's unavoidable that this approach will be made. Since, I mean, Russia is, well, it's very important because, of course, it has the biggest nuclear arsenal in the world. And one could not say this is not an important factor. But as it is showing, it is completely outdated in its strategies, military strategies, and even in its disinformation strategies, it is not really very performant. But there are much worse at the world level, much more dangerous powers. And I think that you made a point very, very well. I would like to say to you that I fully agree with you on this point. And now, please, Dr. Siegfried Wolf, what do you think about this optimist perspective in a possible change of position in Pakistan?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, basically I would agree with the comment that there are optimistic signs coming out from Pakistan, from a little bit from the theoretical perspective, one would say that the Ukraine-Russia war might perhaps turn into what we say or describe as a critical juncture to break this entrenched patterns of the past. which means that we might perhaps observe major changes when it comes to Pakistan. But I have to go again a little bit back to the domestic point of view. The reason why I say that at the first sight, what I described in my initial statement, it looks not so much different what we saw in the past, like changing governments, the speculation of a military involvement in the change of government. So this is also nothing, not so much new. Also that positive signs from the parliamentary sphere. So this will be observed. But what is interesting, what is new, what's coming out from the military, what Paulo indicated before. And from my humble perspective, I think there is a kind of realization when you read between the lines within the military top leadership that they realize that they made a major mistake in promoting Khan 3 years ago into the office, and that this turned not to the best for Pakistan. And there are developments. Khan used his time in office for major Islamization policies. His promotion of the blasphemy laws, his internationally talk on Islamophobia, he used and the change of the curriculum, the Islamization of textbooks, funded by the European Union, by the way. And I think Khan used his time in office to promote his support base. A support base which is mainly focusing on radicalized middle class in Pakistan. And what the biggest mistake was, I think, from the in which Bajwa realized that they wanted to have. There was much talk about Khan as the frontman of the military. This game played Khan very well, despite the fact that he always played, oh no, I'm independent. But to a certain degree, he used this also in particular when it comes to his anti-India propaganda, which he used on all possible platforms to say something against India. So because this was a way how he thought he can please the military. But in fact, what happened, and this might force the military to make major changes, that Khan used not only anti-West, anti-American, and also anti-India propaganda and a pro-Russia policy to push polarization within Pakistan, not to please the military, but to sideline the military. So to establish him as a counterforce to the military influence in the politics. I think this was his major aim. And when you see now how he pushed the US conspiracy theory, he's pushing this. And now the military sees they have a problem. There's a crisis. When they continue with the anti-India propaganda, they push further Islamization, which was before in the past seen by the military top leadership as an instrument, but this turned suddenly against them. Internally, in Afghanistan, everywhere. So they have an issue, and when they act now on Khan regarding his anti-American statements, they would easily threat to establish him as a martyr, and this they want to avoid. So they have now to think very smartly how to position itself. And I think, and this is why I say we might watch a critical juncture, that we could interpret or say that the Russia-Ukraine war might be the pushing factor within Pakistani strategic thinking to work out major changes, which of course might not be so explicitly that we will witness immediately a change in the rhetoric on Pakistani rhetoric on Kashmir. But we have already signs that perhaps it has a positive effect on something like stopping support for cross-border terrorism against Pakistani neighbors funded by the state. You have already the signs that, and this is very important issue, that the terrorist Hafiz was had to face a trial and I think he was bailed to 32 years. It's important development in Pakistan. And when we consider how hesitating the authorities are in trailing terrorists, so I think there is a option that we might have tremendous changes.
Thank you so much, Siegfried. I would summing up with this this very well-known quotation of Hillary Clinton: "Snakes in your backyard won't bite only neighbors." That's what she said to Pakistani leaders some 11 years ago, and apparently General Bajwa, he understood it. He understood it, and he is acting on it. Of course, things are not so immediately positive. I mean, the new minister in charge of minorities is also charged of Islam and it pro-Taliban extremists. That is not really a good sign for the problems we already have in the minorities. We had this disastrous bombarding in Afghanistan that killed a lot of civilians. These heavy-handed tactics that unfortunately continue to be the hallmark of the Pakistani forces. And most importantly, as you correctly said, I mean, the European Union had a complete disastrous policy regarding Pakistan up to now. It really supported all factors of fanaticization, namely in teaching critically. Will the European Union understand it needs to change course and it needs to support those in Pakistan that want a peaceful future, knowing that taking in consideration the fanaticization of the country that has no parallel in the Islamic world. It is the most fanaticized by the public, not only through madrasas, but the public schools are an instrument to this, and the situation got worse now after the latest reforms introduced by Imran Khan. So we cannot expect, sudden, miraculous improvements, but perhaps strategically we can be optimistic if things go well. And of course, it would help if the European Union would support those who are for peace, understanding, and of course, in the long run, a liberal democratic environment instead of supporting those who want to increase the fanatic dynamics of the country. Of course, this goes without saying. Well, we are practically ending our time. I don't know if any of you want to add anything to our debate. If you do not want to, I think that this was a very, very rich conversation. It will be available in our website recorded. We will make a summing up of it. And we were very much delighted to have the presence of Dr. Frenchy with us. Thank you very much to you in particular. Thank you very much for, you're welcome, to Albino Braz that has been making this conversation possible in the backstage. Thank you very much, Siegfried. And we are looking forward to having a next debate in the next one will be on the 3rd of May. We did not announce it yet. Will be on the gender apartheid in Afghanistan. We will have some Afghan women speaking about it. It's going to be another angle of what is happening in South Asia. And we will certainly continue to accompany the Indo-Pacific situation very closely. Thank you very much to both of you. Thank you very much to all of you that have been following us in the social media. Bye-bye.